back. This is lesson 8 on the nervous system and its connection to exercise. And once again, we covered this at level 2 and we're looking to take our knowledge up to the next level, studying at level 3. And what we want to do is we want to be able to understand the nervous system and how it affects us when we exercise. And in particular, we're going to look at the role of something called the central nervous system and also the peripheral nervous system. We're going to delve into that into a little bit more detail and all the areas that are involved with the CNS and indeed the PNS. We're going to be able to describe nervous control and transmission of a nervous impulse, so looking really at how an electronic signal moves down a nerve. We're going to be able to describe the structure and the function of a neuron. We're going to explain the role of a motor unit, and we're going to be able to explain the process of motor unit recruitment, which we looked at in a bit of detail at level 2, but we're going to break it down some more, get some more understanding going on, and work at level 3. So, first thing that I'd like to talk about is that the nervous and also the endocrine systems as well. So, the nervous and the endocrine systems are the systems by which we maintain something called homeostasis. And what homeostasis is it's a physical state where we are in a stable environment. We have a stable internal environment. That's probably the best way to put it. So, we're able to function correctly, we're able to move in the right way, we're able to mentally think, and we're able to get around without having any sort of pain. And that's what homeostasis is. And the nervous system and the endocrine system are all about creating homeostasis and making sure that we're well. So the nervous system does this through really a system of complex webs that go all around the body, which are essentially nerves. If you break down the nerves and you were to string them out on a table, they'd look like a big spider web, but they go all the way around our body and wrap around all our muscles and organs and everywhere really around the body. We also have the endocrine system, which I'm not particularly looking at in too much detail in this presentation, but the endocrine system and the nervous system work very closely together, and the nervous system works through its web and through sort of electronic impulses travelling around that web, whereas what the endocrine system does, that has a series of glands and it releases hormones to send more chemical-based message. So something like the release of testosterone would be a chemical message, and that's something that's handled by the endocrine system. Something like moving an arm and flexing a bicep is something that's handled by the nervous system. And exercise really represents one of the biggest challenges to the internal environment of our body. So our homeostasis is really threatened by exercise. So it's really important to understand that how these systems work and regulate the environment to make sure that we keep our homeostasis while we do exercise. And when I say that exercise threatens our homeostasis, what I mean is that it puts a lot of extra stress on the body in terms of fatigue, in terms of we need more energy, in terms of moving more. All this stuff has to be facilitated by the nervous system. And I'm not saying that to sit there all day and not to do any exercise or any activity, that's not going to lead to being a healthier person. But what I am saying is we need to be aware of how our nervous system manages the stresses that come in turn with doing exercise. And if we break down the nervous system a little bit more, it has really 3 distinct functions. Number 1 is sensation. Number 2 is analysis. And number 3 is response. So when I talk about sensation, the nervous system has sort of sensors that are spread out all around the body, and they gather information about what's going on. It could be that they're looking at the amount of carbon dioxide in our blood. It could be that they're looking at the air temperature and, how do we need to react to that? But they're responsible for, we pick up something hot, like a really, really hot cup, and we drop it straight away. the nervous system is responsible for that sensation. We also have analysis. So what we're talking about here is the role of the nervous system to analyse the information that it's receiving. So it's picked up a message that it's cold. So how is it going to then analyse that information? What decisions do we need to make to look after our homeostasis? Do we need to start shivering? Do we need to start sweating to maintain our homeostasis? And that's what analysis is all about. And then thirdly, we have response, and that's initiating the correct response, whether it be a muscular contraction, so moving an arm, starting shivering, those sort of muscular contractions, activating the digestive tract and moving food through there, that's a muscular contraction as well. Or it could be a glandular secretion, so that's something that would be handled more so by the endocrine system, but our nervous system will need to pick up and we'll need to be aware of what's going on in the environment and then interpret that information for that glandular secretion to happen. So that's a bit of an overview, and what we'll do now is have a little bit more of a look at the diagram that's on the screen. So the nervous system is broken down into two main components. We have the CNS and the PNS. And our CNS is our central nervous system, and our PNS is our peripheral nervous system. And the CNS deals with sort of all of the neurons and all of the nervous aspects that are contained within the brain and the spine. And the PNS, what that does is that really consists of the outside bits, so the bits that are on our muscles that are away from the spine, that are away from the brain. It's a bit like the appendicular skeleton. When we looked at that, when we looked at the skeleton, we have the central bit, which is inside, which is the stuff that's close, so the spine and the brain, and then we have the stuff on the outside, which is the PNS. And what the PNS does, it has the nerves that connect to the central nervous system and to the rest of the body and the external environment there, and they're the means by which the central nervous system gets all of its information. So all the information that the central nervous system needs to function is found by our peripheral nervous system. Or if the central nervous system makes a decision and it wants to send a message to one of our muscles, it does that through the peripheral nervous system. And if we have a little bit of a look, this should break it down a little bit more. So there you have your central nervous system, brain and the spine, and then the peripheral nervous system is all of the other neurons that are around the rest of the body. There you go. So really should have a real good understanding now of what the central nervous system is and also what the peripheral nervous system is. And the peripheral nervous system can be broken down into two further blocks. It can be broken down into the somatic system and the autonomic system. The somatic system, what that does is that controls conscious movement. So I want to flex my bicep, I want to stand up, I want to go and pick up a weight in the gym. That's something that you can control and you can do. That's controlled by the somatic nervous system. The autonomic system, that controls all of the involuntary stuff that goes on in our body. For example, digesting our food. That's not something we have to think about, but it's something that happens automatically, autonomic. So that's what's going on there. You have the autonomic system, which looks after essentially all of the stuff that we don't have to think about when we want to use our neurons. Okay, the autonomic system, once again, can be broken down two further times. So it can be subdivided into the sympathetic branch and this acts as an accelerator to stimulate metabolic process in the body, for example, increasing heart rate. And it also has the parasympathetic branch, and what this does, it acts as a brake to slow down metabolic function in the body. And these are interesting areas when we speak about physical activity, because you've got one system that wants to speed things up and it wants to get more things going, and you've got one system that wants to slow things down. And in terms of exercise, I guess the sympathetic system, that's what's going to be, we're going to be using that when we want to prepare for physical activity, or when we want to, we might, when we're getting ready for activity, that's what's going to be on. We're going to be using the sympathetic branch. We're going to be accelerating. We're going to want more metabolic process going on. We're going to want the heart to pump faster. We're going to want more blood going around the body. But then when we stop exercising, the parasympathetic is going to kick in, and that's going to slow things back down. It's going to bring us back to normal. And some people refer to these as like war and peace. So like sympathetic is all war, it's all going on, it's all quick, everything's happening. And the parasympathetic is the peace. It brings everything back to normal, restores that homeostasis that we mentioned earlier. And it's important to be aware of that, because you might get a question come up in the exam regarding, if we're preparing for activity, which system would be working? If we're slowing down from activity, which system would be working? So, just want to go back to the top again. Have a look at this. So, CNS and PNS. CNS is the central nervous system. Here we have our peripheral nervous system. Peripheral can be broken down into the somatic and the autonomic. Remember, the somatic is all those things that we do voluntary on our own. The autonomic is the stuff that happens automatically, like digestive function, for example. And then inside the autonomic, so the automatic stuff that goes on, we have the sympathetic and we have the parasympathetic. And sympathetic is all about getting metabolic function going on, quickening the heart rate, getting more blood moving around the body. Parasympathetic is about bringing that heart rate back down to normal and restoring our normal state after we've exercised. So now we have a greater knowledge of exactly what the systems look like and how they can be broken down into different areas. It's important for us to look at an actual individual nerve, and essentially this is a neuron. Okay, so when we say nerve or neuron, what we're really talking about is it's like a cable or a wire that flows through the body, and it allows signals or impulses to travel from one part of the body to another. And some nerves will be quite short, and some nerves may be a little bit longer. For example, there's one big nerve that runs sort of from our ankle right the way up to the lumbar region at the bottom of the spine. Some others may be a lot shorter. However, they've all got the same function and they're all structured in the same way. And that is what a nerve looks like, or a neuron. But now I want to break it down a little bit further. So, what we have is the primary distinguishing feature of the cell, or the thing that makes it different to other cells, are these things called dendrites. All these things that look like little, I suppose, roots coming from trees, they're what we know as dendrites. And what the dendrites are, these are the bits that sense the stimulus. So, heat or pain or pressure, those are the things that sense it. Okay? Then, running down from the cell body, we also have something called an axon. And the axon is the thing that the electronic signals travel. Okay? So when we have a wire, for example, in a house, the signal or the electric may travel through the copper that's inside the wire. When we're looking at our nerves, we have axons, and the electronic signals, they travel down the axons. Okay, the axon's also covered by something quite distinctive, and that's essentially it's a protein compound called the myelin sheath, and that's what these little blue dots are. Lots and lots of little myelin sheaths that cover up the axon, and these are important because these help to transfer the electronic signal down the axon. What else have we got going on? We have also got, at the end of the axon, we have an axon terminal. So here you can see individual muscle fibers that we looked at before when we looked at muscles, and connected onto those are lots of little axon terminals. And what the terminal is, that's the interface between the neuron and the other cells. So it's essentially where the action happens. It's where this electronic signal travels down the neuron, and then it's here, all right, at the axon terminal, where it passes on that signal to the muscle, for example. That's where that happens. There are a couple of other little bits on here that we should probably pick up on. We have the action potential, which we're going to look at in some more detail later on, but the action potential is the signal or the electronic impulse that travels down the axon. And we also have the node of Ranvier, and essentially what the node of Ranvier is are little gaps in between the myelin sheaths, and that's what they are. So looking at this now, we should understand we've also got the nucleus as well. Nucleus is the same, all cells have nucleus, and it's at the centre of the cell, and it looks after the cell and makes sure that the cell is functioning correctly. But we have the dendrites that pick up the impulse, then they fire the signal, comes down the axon, passes through. We have the myelin sheath, or Schwann cell, some people call it, travel down through all that. Then we get to the axon terminal, where we're able to pass on our message. We'll have a little bit of a look at this video, and that should, let's go back. What the video should do is help us understand a little bit more about what I've just been talking about. I think it should already be loaded up if I can find it.
A nerve impulse is an electrical current that travels along dendrites or axons due to ions moving through voltage-gated channels in the neuron's plasma membrane. Voltage-gated channels open and close in response to an electrical voltage, so they are affected by changes in electrical charge around them. When a neuron is at rest, a charge difference is maintained between the inside and outside of the cell. This charge difference is produced and maintained largely by active transport using sodium-potassium pumps. The pumps send sodium ions out of the cell and bring potassium ions in. While other channels allow some flow of potassium ions back out of the cell, the sodium ions cannot easily get back in to replace the lost positive charges. The overall result is that the exterior of the cell has a net positive charge and the interior has a net negative charge. The difference in charge between the interior and exterior of the cell is called the resting membrane potential. A nerve impulse begins when a stimulus disturbs the plasma membrane on a dendrite, causing sodium channels to open. Sodium ions flow into the cell, lessening the charge difference at that location. If the change is enough, it will cause nearby voltage-gated sodium channels to open. This allows so many sodium ions to flood into the cell at that location that the membrane there is depolarized, with the local region inside the cell having a net positive charge and the outside of the cell having a net negative charge. This affects neighboring voltage-gated sodium channels, which then open, moving the depolarization along the membrane. This moving depolarization is called an action potential. Changes occur behind the action potential to restore the resting membrane potential. The voltage-gated sodium channels close and voltage-gated potassium channels open. This allows a rapid flow of potassium ions out of the cell repolarizing the membrane so that the inside is again negative and the outside positive. This is followed by use of sodium-potassium pumps to fully restore the resting membrane potential and to reestablish proper concentrations of sodium and potassium ions inside and outside of the cell.
Okay, so I hope that's helped, guys. A bit more of a scientific explanation on that one. If you do want to take the quiz, you can see the URL. It's a bit of a long one, but it's up at the top of the page. It's also on the PowerPoint as well if you want to copy and paste it and put it in. Have a go. There's a little bit of a quiz on here to test your learning, but I'm going to jump back into the PowerPoint and continue on with what we were looking at. So, skip through this that we've already covered, and alright then, here we go. So just finished this one. We should have a bit of a better, well, a lot better understanding of the process of the electric current moving it down the axon. And what I want to look at now is a motor unit, because what a motor unit is, it is an individual or an individual motor unit is comprised of a group of muscle fibers and a motor nerve that stimulates those fibers. So once a message has travelled down an axon, comes to a motor unit, and essentially the axon terminals are at the end of this motor unit. So it's the axon terminals that activate this motor unit, and what they do is groups of motor units will work together, and they will sort of coordinate the contractions of a single muscle. So all of the motor units within a muscle are considered as a motor pool. So you have a group of motor units that make up a motor pool, and all of the muscle fibers in a motor unit are of a similar fiber type. So a motor unit will be either attached to type 1 fiber, type 2 fibers, whichever one it may be. And when a motor unit is activated, all of its fibers contract. So when the motor unit fires, every single fiber that it looks after will contract. It's not possible for the motor unit to only use maybe 3 of the 10 fibers it's connected with, alright? It doesn't work like that. It only connects all of them. And the number of fibers within each unit can vary, dependent on which muscle it is, and it can even change from muscle to muscle. So the largest muscle masses in the body, they have more units, and the smaller ones, they're going to have less. For example, the thigh muscle, which is a really, really, really big muscle, that can have maybe 1,000 fibers in each unit, whereas a smaller muscle, like a real small muscle, that might only have 10. So, it really depends on the size of the muscle. And muscles with more fibers and muscles with more units have more control of the force that we're able to put out. Just to have a look at what we were talking about earlier. So the motor unit can only recruit, alright? So let's say that we have, we're to look at this from a more sort of a slightly different point of view, okay? The more amount of force we need to generate, the more amount of motor units we need to recruit. So if I'm going to pick up, say if my 1 rep max on the bench press is, 80 kilograms, for example. So if I'm going to push 80 kilograms, which is my max, I'm going to need to recruit motor units 1, 2, and 3 to get that job done. But if I'm just using the 20 kilogram weight, then maybe I only need to recruit motor unit number 1. And that really is what we know as it's called the all or one. It's all or nothing really. or all or none, as it says here. And essentially what we're saying is when it fires, we will only be able to fire all of the fibres that are connected to that motor unit. And in terms of us looking at, the principle in a little bit more detail, what we have here, we have type 1 motor units recruited, type 1 plus type 2A, type 1 plus type 2A plus 2B. So for example, if I'm doing something that's not too strenuous, it's quite easy for me. So for example, as we said I'm going to press 20 kilograms each side. I can probably do that using just type 1 fibres. Remember what type 1 fibres are, alright? They're the ones that are not as strong, they can keep working for a long time, have lots of mitochondria in them, alright? Something gets a bit more difficult, maybe I'm working on pushing 40 kilograms instead of the 80, then I'm going to use my type 1 and my type 2A. Remember the type 2A are the ones that flip in between, so they've got a little bit of elements of both going on. And if I want to recruit something really heavy, as we said, I'm going to need my type 1, my type 2A, and my type 2B. I'm going to have to go through all of them. I'm going to have to get them all involved. And that's what we were talking about earlier. The motor unit is either on or it's off. It's doing all or it's doing nothing. So hopefully we've covered off being able to look at the central nervous system in a bit more detail, understand the role of the CNS and the PNS and all of the little subdivisions coming off of that PNS. Able to describe nervous control and sort of how the neurons are set up and how the electronic pulses move down the axon. Function of a neuron and a motor unit. And we've also looked at the process of essentially all or none and how a motor unit works. Hope it's been helpful and hope to catch you up on the next presentation, which continues building your knowledge on the subject of the nervous system.